All right, let's go and get going. Thank you all for joining us for today's webinar on warehousing of the future. My name is Mike Richardson. I head up product at ShipHawk, which is a warehouse and fulfillment automation platform. And I've had the pleasure of working in supply chain technology for the last decade. Today, I'm joined with Jeremy Bodenhamer. Jeremy is the founder and CEO of ShipHawk and the author of Adapt or Die, a best-selling book that talks a bit about warehousing in the future. So Jeremy, welcome. Let's just start with a brief introduction.
Thanks, Mike. Well, I have to start by saying I've got a strong and beautiful wife who told me she was going to dial in today. She's in public education as a career. We have 3 little boys, 8, 9, and 11. So life at our house is never boring and our stuff is always broken. During the day, I run ShipHawk, where we're automating the world behind the buy button. I read this morning that there are 150,000 distribution centers globally, and only 5% of those employ some type of automation. Our goal at ShipHawk is to automate these warehouses without thrashing the workers, the environment, or the bottom line.
Awesome. So we're here to talk today about warehousing in the future. Why is this important to you?
Well, historically, there's been an insufficient focus on operations, right? That world behind the buy button. Most people still think of warehouses as these tired and dusty old places, when in reality, the warehouse is really the center of a global revolution and the battleground between real life and artificial life. Walk into a bookstore or find one online, and you're going to find countless books on sales and marketing, the space in front of the buy button, but almost nothing on operations, that space behind the buy button. Amazon is Amazon because of their relentless focus on automation and execution behind the buy button. And independent shippers understanding and prioritizing these operations is the future of the warehouse. Last month, I'm not sure if anyone saw this, there was an internal memo that was leaked from Amazon that said they're facing a crisis. If they continue business as usual, business as they do it today, which keep in mind is incredibly automated already, they will deplete the available labor supply in the US by 2024. We've spent the last 2 years thinking that the lack of workers through the pandemic and now today was a problem. And the reality is that the independent businesses need to start preparing for a future without these workers before it turns into a crisis for them as well. We think the need for robots has never been bigger, but in reality, the need for people to will continue to impact every shipper and will continue into the future. To survive in this next phase, these operations must do everything in their power to automate this world behind their own buy buttons.
So Jeremy, you mentioned a second ago that we're on there's a global revolution happening in the operations side of things. Who are the players? Help me understand a little bit about where this is taking place and what that revolution looks like.
Yeah, I mean, you could say that the players are retailers, wholesalers, manufacturers, distributors. You could say that it's companies like ours, TMSs, WMSs, robotics companies, ERPs. But I actually think the real revolution is between the robots and the people, because we need these devices, this hardware, to do a lot of the hardest work in these distribution centers, but we still need the people. And as far as we can tell with technology, we will need people as far as we can see into the future. And so instead of creating a harsh environment between the artificial life and the real life, we have to recognize that our job is to actually improve the world that the people need to operate in, so that we can keep attracting those employees and keep having them be productive and additive to our business. That's where I think the real revolution is happening.
Awesome. So in Adapt or Die, you talk a little bit about the 5 APIs of the apocalypse. Can you talk a little bit about what these are and what role they play in that revolution?
Absolutely. I predict a possible and very real future scenario without independent merchants. And by that, I mean one where 5 global e-commerce engines, we got Amazon, Alibaba, Walmart, JD.com, and Shopify. They run global commerce. Every product, every transaction, every dollar spent goes through their platform, their infrastructure. These giants, they don't have the goal of cornering the market. They want to become the market. They want to become that system that everyone lives on. They already own the factories, the planes, the ships, the trucks, the warehouses, the sorting facilities and distribution centers, the vans speeding through all our neighborhoods, the digital infrastructure the entire system lives on, and the data on all the customers that are operating on any of the platforms that they control. Their power and scale are beyond anything we've ever seen before.
So we're all aware of like the size and scale of businesses like Amazon, but help us understand in your mind, what is it exactly that they're doing today that makes these companies such a threat beyond just being the biggest of the e-commerce giants out there?
Yeah, let's go back to this revolution that's happening in the warehouse, and let's look at where we're at today and where our independents are having to compete, right? Because that's really where the threat is at. To us as an independent merchant, we have one distribution center, maybe two, maybe we use a 3PL. And how are we competing against these giants who are really setting these buyers' expectations? So a few examples here. Number one, Amazon spends almost $250 million on each new smart warehouse. If we're going to open a new warehouse, most of us on this webinar here, maybe we're thinking, a few million, not $250 million. Supposedly, Amazon today stocks north of 120 million SKUs. Let's pivot over to Walmart. In 2019, Walmart was generating $4 million every hour for the Walton family. Let's look at Alibaba. In 2019, on Singles Day, Alibaba processed 1 billion packages in a single day. So with this type of data, who do you think is more prepared and properly resourced for a world where warehouse workers are hard or impossible to hire? Who do you think has the automations in place to continue to get products delivered when times get tough? And who continues to build systems to force these independent merchants into closed ecosystem, right? That's really what they're doing. We don't think of, oh, hey, we're going to go out of business, Amazon will take it all. No, what they're going to do is force us into their ecosystems where they're taking outsized portions of the sale, and it makes it hard for everyone to compete without them. So that's where I think the threat really lies with the big five.
So let's talk a little bit about Amazon for a second. I mean, Amazon feels very much like you have to be friendly with them today, right? Many e-commerce businesses have to list their products on Amazon to this day. How do you envision a world where kind of can't live without exists?
Well, I think the key here is optionality, right? I, as an independent, can sell where I need to sell, when I need to sell, and how I want to sell. The less optionality I have, for example, let's pretend that Amazon is a major channel for us, and Amazon comes in and says, hey, now you can only sell on our platform if you don't sell the same product on competing channels. Who are you going to pick? You're going to pick eBay or Amazon, right? Like all the smaller, no matter how big they are, everyone's small compared to these giants, right? So you know who you're going to have to pick unless you're willing to sacrifice that order volume.
Yeah, it's interesting with Amazon specifically. They recently have been making a big push to the seller partner API, which is a kind of a redesign around merchant web services, which existed for a long time. And along with it, they've finally started to put some tools in place for third parties like ShipHawk and merchants themselves to be able to access things like basic things like sandboxes and access. But we've noticed and we've seen a big push in Amazon recently with really pushing and leveraging their APIs to enable more of their transportation services. So with their big push into transportation, how do you see that playing into this?
Oh, that's interesting because that's part of the closed ecosystem variables, right? That's one of the services that they want you dependent on. And we saw this pre-pandemic. We had customers, I was in the warehouses where Amazon would walk in and they'd start making this DSP network, delivery service provider network, this network of contractors that drive the Amazon vans we all see around town. They would expose that capacity to some of the desired targets, right? They'd look at a business that's doing a lot of business on a competing platform, and they'd come in and say, hey, put some of those orders on our trucks. We'll take it for a depressed fee, right? And they knew they could inject that into their network relatively easily. Amazon already has neighborhood density, which is really the crown jewel of distribution, which means I want to stop my van at every single house, right? That's where the lowest possible cost is. And so it's just cream on the crop and its way to undermine competitors. Well, what happened? We had a global pandemic and Amazon was pushed to the brim, and they had to back off and say, well, no, now we can't take third-party packages, right? So now that volume has returned to more normal levels, you're seeing those same tactics all over again. So just like access to the platform, access to FBA, access to all these different services they make available, that delivery program, that capacity is yet another one. And it makes them, if you become reliant on those prices and those service times, you have to give that up if they force you to.
Yeah. I mean, with the global constraints right now on capacity, Amazon stepping up as a carrier is a very interesting option, right? You talk about optionality. I mean, do you see them being a very real player on like the carrier side of things, the actual transportation side of things in the long run? Do you see that being something that every merchant is going to end up using at some point?
I think every merchant is a stretch. I think that Amazon's goal is absolutely that every merchant is having to rely on every one of their services as possible on that side of the business, right? We get confused a lot because we think about Amazon simply as the marketplace side, the eyeballs, right? Some of us in tech think about it as AWS, the servers that we can host our technology on. But in reality, the real drive that Amazon's been pushing on that marketplace side of the business is through distribution. It's what happens behind the buy button. That is where they've optimized. That's where they've set themselves apart. And so it's an easy argument to make that is another place they think they can get an easy hook in independent merchants who are selling other places. Amazon does not like it when independent merchants are not giving them ad revenue to place their products, giving them their customer lists and their data, and selling on competing platforms, right?
What do you think about the push that's happening right now? So Amazon, obviously Amazon Pay exists. Amazon owns the buy button as it were in many cases, and they're making a push now to actually take that buy button functionality and shipping functionality out directly into the shopping carts that our merchants are using day to day now, right? Actually bringing that functionality from just an Amazon capability to now a pay and ship functionality in virtually any type of proprietary site or e-commerce platform that exists out there. How do you think the other guys in the space, specifically Shopify, Walmart, et cetera, are going to react to that? And what do you think that means for merchants?
Yeah, I mean, I think Shopify has done an excellent job of leveraging some of Amazon's weaknesses historically and have done that to a certain degree. I mean, I'm one that loves my Shop Pay app. I love being on an independent site and seeing the consistency of the Shopify checkout across these other sites. It makes it super easy for me to check out. To be honest with you, it's easier for me to check out there than on an Amazon page, right? I think that is the future. I think that unification, you and I have talked about this a lot, Mike, through browser extensions and the like, are enormously valuable. And if we can do that within shopping carts, including payment, I think it's going to open up a lot more or a lot less friction in the checkout process and in the delivery process for buyers like us.
Right, but do you think that with Amazon doing it, that it actually takes away the optionality for our merchants? How do you see that playing into it?
If you have to ask the question, you already know the answer. It absolutely takes away the optionality. We want the merchants, we want the independents, right? As advocates for the independents, we want those independents to have the option to sell wherever they want, under whatever terms they want, whatever platforms they want, right? And still be able to have the same power of distribution, right? The same access to pricing, same access to delivery times, so that they can choose what is best for their business model and their customers. So that type of service by way of Amazon definitely is not in line with that future.
Yeah, I mean, so it's safe to say that most businesses don't have the war chest to compete with Amazon. In Adapter.ai, I know you talk a lot about how small and mid-sized businesses can compete to stay alive today. Can you talk through just like some of the strategies that they need to be on top of to stay competitive or even thrive?
Yeah, remember that even though they're small, the independents are having to compete against the same buyer expectations set by the big five, right? So they need to be investing, us as independents, we need to be investing in warehouse automation tools and those that are accessible to us. So we can, one, get orders out the door faster, two, with fewer workers in the warehouse, and three, make sure we're doing so at the lowest possible cost or the lowest available cost. Things like carrier rate shopping, order level routing, packing optimization, multi-warehouse or distribution point optimization if you do ship from store or use partial 3PLs for fulfillment, hardware support, that type of thing. But the first place I tell companies to actually focus is metrics. Setting operational goals in the distribution center and managing the business to those goals is really step one. Whether throughput, cost per order, or there's other key drivers of efficiency that are important to the business, most companies we talk to don't have these operational metrics in place. So they actually don't know what they're trying to achieve. They're trying to boil the ocean per se and just do a little bit of everything. So I think metrics are really first and foremost, but there's some other ways and areas that companies should be focusing as well.
Real quick on metrics,
Yeah.
just before we get too far. I don't want to get too far off that. How do you go about setting the right metric, right? Like, I think a lot about, first capturing a metric is one thing, but I feel like every business is very unique on this front, right? We talk to everyone who ships, everyone who's shipping home decor to electronics to everything you could possibly imagine of. How do you think about capturing those metrics? Where should they start? When you think about operational metrics, is it specific to the warehouse that you're thinking about? Is it specific to the shipping experience? Help me understand a little bit more about how a business can go about setting those metrics up and where they should start.
Yeah. And because you and I talk about this quite a lot, it's a little bit of a trick question because we can call it 4 independent merchants shipping the same product from the same geo with warehouses, more or less next to each other. And each of them will have different workflows and they'll swear that their workflow is the best, right? And so it's really difficult for us to go in and say, this is the most important metric to you because you actually have your own way of running your business, fulfilling your orders. So I think that this is actually the easiest place to start. It reminds me of Dave Ramsey's debt snowball. You don't pay the biggest one off first, you pay the smallest one off first, right? Get that traction. And in terms of setting the metric, if you take something super simple, like let's say average cost per order. And yes, this could actually in the long run not be a valuable metric because it's averaging all your orders into one cost, right? If you run, let's say a subscription business and you have a homogeneous inventory type, it could be very valuable, but let's just keep it simple. Average order. It gives us a place to start digging deeper into our business from an actual measurement perspective. So we can say, okay, well, what's our current average cost per order? Let's make a change and let's see if it impacts that average cost per order. And let's say step 2 is, hey, we got a bunch of SKUs here. Some of them are big, some of them are small. Some of them go with FedEx and some of them go with YRC on pallets. Like we can find some elements where we can make it more specific, where we can dive deeper. And then we can say, okay, well, let's look at our average LTL price per order and our average parcel price per order. Let's look at that. Let's compare it to the order value. Let's look at it and compare it to how long it takes us to process the orders, right? Order processing time from the moment the order is placed to how long it takes to hit the distribution center, to how long it takes that carrier to scan it into their system. I mean, I ordered a product from one of our customers for my wife. She wanted some dumbbells. We have a garage gym. We have 3 little boys and we do workouts at home with them. And I was missing a couple dumbbell weight sizes. And she asked me to get those because they're on the smaller side. And the order was scanned in. I got a notification that the label was created. And it sat there for, I think, like 10 days, almost approaching 2 weeks without the carrier even picking it up. So I had to reach out to the merchant and say, hey, what's going on with this order? So knowing how long it is between those steps is a very simple place to start. But the idea is start with something simple, start in one place. And then as you learn, slowly expand into more granular measurements.
Absolutely.
There's other areas to focus as well, though, too. And let's just hit a few of these high level. I don't want to belabor them too much, but I'm still sticking with start with metrics. But number 2, shipping. Most B2C businesses lose somewhere between 2 and 5% of their net sales on shipping expenses. So this means a mid-sized retailer with 20 million in net sales is losing $1 million a year on shipping overspend. Packaging. 40% of shipments that are shipped in boxes are shipped in boxes that are too large for the contents. Carriers use dimensional pricing now to price. So this can add up to 25% to the shipping costs. And in addition, on the environmental side, this is putting an additional 25 million additional truckloads on the roads in the United States each year alone. We're just shipping air, 25 million loads. Warehousing. It's predicted that the US is going to have to add another billion in square feet to keep up with the growth in e-commerce of warehouse space. So I always advise shippers to look up before looking out. Are we fully maximizing the cube, right? Or do we have racking? Do we have everything organized? Robotics. We started this with robotics and talking about the relationship between robots and workers. As of 2018, the average distribution center stocked 14,000 items. That's 14,000 SKUs. And of those items, only 43% could be handled with robots, which means the vast majority of your inventory still has to have a human component. And that brings us to operational workers, which I think are the key to the future. 55% of warehouse managers report that labor scarcity is one of their top problems. Labor costs are already making up 65% of most facilities' operating budgets, yet almost 20% of these workers describe themselves as actively disengaged, and half of them describe themselves as doing just enough to get by. So the math doesn't add up here from an efficiency perspective. The business isn't getting the ROI it needs, but we're also not investing in these workers like we need to. I'd love to see a greatest warehouses to work at list, like we have the greatest companies lists that people fawn over every year.
So you talked a little bit about robotics, and this is one that kind of always hits home with me, because I think about just the costs of robotics in today's environment. I mean, the robotics at an Amazon facility are not something that your traditional small or mid-sized business can keep up with. Can you talk a little bit about like what you're seeing happening around robotics in general, democratization of robotics technology? When you really think about robotics, I want to understand a little bit more about what specifically you're thinking about on that front. Like, what types of robotics capabilities should small and mid-sized businesses really be thinking about?
Yeah, a lot of questions there. So just like the metrics answer, I like to think about this as simple as possible. So I think of all robotics as hardware, right? Most of us hopefully have scan guns and scales, label printers, maybe label applicators, and we can get more and more advanced through the robotics, right? In many cases, the challenge isn't even accessing the robots, it's accessing the implementers to come into your organization and get those robots set up and functioning. There's also enormous cost, but business models are evolving to support these. I mean, there's robots as a service now. There's all sorts of different financial instruments that can allow for businesses to start stepping into greater use of hardware. One of the companies that I love that many of our customers work with is Pack Size. I love box making machines. If you do enough volume to justify buying the bulk cardboard, it makes sense. They're now API enabled, so you can automate the feed into the machine and you just have boxes come out of the right size. Others are using products like ours at ShipHawk and the dimensioning capabilities there to instruct them which boxes to use, which can solve that same problem. But bottom line, I think, is don't try to boil the ocean. Don't go from 0 to 100. Just pick a small thing to improve on and then grow from there.
Yeah, I think that's a really important point. I've definitely seen an increase in inbound activity, at least at ShipHawk, around people looking for things like accessing conveying capabilities, integration with products like Cubistans, integration with dimensioning products. It's definitely an area that I'm very interested in expanding on the ShipHawk side of things. It's something that I think is becoming more of a realistic option for a lot of the shippers that are out there. So, you've laid out some areas that businesses can start looking into to start investing and really working on. What are some future predictions? Where do you think supply chain and supply chain technology is going in the coming years?
Yeah, I got a few of them. I actually like talking about these a lot. I might geek out on it a little bit too much, so shut me down if you need to, Mike. First, I'm a big believer in purpose-driven business models like Tesla, Tom's, Method, Parker Clay, Grove, and a lot of these extend into the supply chain side. And I have an example I'll share with you in a second here. There's also heightening awareness, as I've been talking about today, about how we treat warehouse workers. I like to call them the hero class after the realization during the pandemic that the world stops without operations workers, right? We're hidden in the shadows until this happened. Neighborhood optimization is another big future push that I'm seeing continue to get steam. The idea of stopping at every single door in the neighborhood. Amazon's not the only one obsessed with that. All the big carriers want that density. Inside the home delivery continues to gain consumer trust. Platforms like Ring or services like Walmart's in-home grocery delivery services, where they're going to put your order all the way in the fridge. When those first came out, there were questions about whether consumers would actually allow that to happen or not. Carrier services, I believe, are going to continue to be commoditized. Many have already caught on and are no longer putting the carrier name in their checkouts. They're putting services or delivery expectations. Most shippers don't care what color truck shows up, as long as it shows up on time and doesn't break everything in the delivery process. We continue to see virtualized carriers aiming to compete with the big guys, where it might be impractical for us to start a new carrier today to compete with the FedEx or UPS. There's plenty of companies that are working on networks of smaller regional players and representing them to shippers as one solution, but it's a virtualized solution. So they're doing the routing behind the scenes. What else? In educating buyers on the impact of their decisions, and this kind of goes back into the purpose-driven business model at the beginning. I recently came into contact with a toothpaste company called Bite, and their goal is to remove all the plastic from toothpaste and mouthwash and dental floss from the supply chain and from the environment. Part of their process is they tell buyers that their shipping is slow on purpose. They're not trying to get 2-day delivery. They're saying upfront, it's going to be slow. It's going to take a week, but we do it on purpose because it does less harm to the environment. And as a buyer that's looking for environmentally friendly products like I am, I'm more than willing to wait a few extra days for my toothpaste. 2-day shipping isn't as attractive as you'd think it would be once you see the damage that it leaves in its wake. So I really like and think there's going to be a lot more traction in the education. I mean, I got an email just this morning from Bite that laid out an entire, it was a marketing piece, but it was educating me as a buyer as to why they use glass bottles, how they're infinitely recyclable. They break down into sand. It's not plastic, and why they send their refills in what amounts to paper bags and slow shipping. And now as a buyer, I'm educated and I want to make those decisions, and I want to keep shopping with this company. And just to be clear, they're not a customer of ours. I just think that this is a good example of the future that we're going to see. And it's very impractical for the big guys, the Amazons and Walmarts of the world, to operate like this. So I think it's a great place for the independents to really make a name for themselves.
I couldn't agree more. I want to just go back a little bit to talk a little bit more about the neighborhood optimization concept. So with more and more of the capacity, being able to get down to that, having control down to the actual door in the neighborhood, what do you think that means for the future of people, merchants setting their businesses up, where they're going to be locating their warehouses, how they're going to use warehouses combined with third-party logistics in order to get it closer to the neighborhood and drive down that shipping distance. And obviously, a small business can't afford to pop up a warehouse in every major city overnight. Just curious how you're thinking about that.
Absolutely. And so today, what we believe is that roughly 60% of the distribution centers that are out there are owned by what we call owner operators, right? The company that has the business is operating their own warehouse, and 40% is outsourced to third parties, these 3PLs. And we make products primarily to run these owner operated facilities. I think we do have a handful of 3PL customers, but it's not really our focus. And what we see in our customer base today is, over time, especially those with more homogenous products, they may say, oh, I'm so tired of running my own warehouse. It's such a hassle, or getting labor is so difficult. Like, it's not easy, right? And so they'll move to a 3PL, and they'll stay there for a little while, and then they'll move back, and they'll reopen their own warehouse because they won't like the controls that they gave up or the service standards or whatever the case may be. And the place I think that these play in the future, which is what you're getting at, is by SKU and by fast moving product. In the book, I talk about having product levels A, B, C. So you have your A's, which are your best sellers, your B, which are your midline, and your C, which is your laggards, the guys that just kind of sit there and don't move very, very quickly. And if I'm going to have a second facility, I don't want to have a huge facility and stock products that aren't going to move, right? So I might just stock my A's there. But as far as it relates to micro fulfillment centers or ship from store or additional fulfillment centers, I think the key in the future is going to be getting the high, fast moving product to as close to the buyer as possible. And we're already starting to see that we have the data to make those predictions. We have the data to be able to tell, hey, where should I actually locate this inventory? And I think that's going to be a combination of store, a combination of third party, and a combination of owned facilities. And the platforms of the future are going to allow us to redistribute that inventory based on that demand, seasonality, timing, that type of thing.
Yeah, can you talk a little about some of the technologies that are doing that today? Some of the startups or the growing companies in this space that are doing that. Companies maybe like FlowSpace, Flex, etc.
Yeah, so I don't know companies that are actually doing what I said, but the FlowSpaces, the Flexes, the Storeds are virtualized networks of 3PLs so that you can actually access additional 3PL facilities. You're not just doing business with one 3PL that has, call it 3 locations or 5 locations. FlowSpace has hundreds of 3PLs. I don't even know how many they have on their platform. And so in the future, I believe that through platforms like ours, you'll be able to access on demand the needed facility and just move the product in and out as necessary, which will drive down the cost, improve the environmental standards because you're not shipping piecemeal from further away, and improve the service to the customer. You can also bundle, if you do it on a local basis in the future, I think you're gonna be able to bundle services with it, whether that's assembly, returns, other things that'll make it a lot more efficient.
Yeah. One of the big areas that you and I spend a lot of time talking about is just merchant and warehouse education. One of the things I'm particularly passionate about is like helping our merchants and their operations teams become more aware of like what's available to them, how they can grow, how they can change their business. What are some areas or what are some ways that you think these types of businesses can go about getting access to education? Are there some resources that you think are particularly important for people to be aware of as they're looking into the future? Outside, of course, like webinars like this.
And I won't point to my book either as one of those sources. So that's an interesting question. And what it conjures up to me is a story that our CTO shares. He knows people that have started in the warehouse and worked their way up to vice president of big major companies. And so I think a lot of the value in the education needs to be related to business training and how the business runs, what the drivers are of that business, what the key metrics and functions are of that business, and allowing those people with the distribution knowledge to rise and have influence in the organization versus bringing people in from the outside that may be experts in certain domains. So I don't know that I would point to a specific source to educate, aside from getting them just investing in the people that work in the warehouse and helping them with their career path as high as we possibly can.
Right on. Well, we're gonna open it up now for a few minutes for some audience Q&A. There is a little Q&A box on your webinar. If you have any questions, feel free to just jot them in there. Give you all a second to start typing some up, and we'll field some of those questions here live. We probably won't be able to get to all of them today, but any questions that we don't answer on the session, we will make time to follow up with you guys after. So I'm going to start with one here. It says, can you talk about some of the differences between the future of warehouse operations for B2B versus B2C, considering the market size of B2B e-commerce, but a historically slower tech adoption speed? Does B2B e-commerce begin to influence B2C at some point?
That's
Actually,
funny.
I like this question.
Well, it's funny because you and I were just talking about digital bills of lading and the adoption there. Why don't you start with this and then I'll close it?
Sure. So I guess first off, we're seeing significant investments by major players in the space to start investing more in B2B e-commerce, right? It's definitely been behind small package overall, but now Shopify has recently made a huge push to enable some B2B functionality. Shopify and Acumatica recently partnered on both the e-commerce and the ERP side to bring more of that B2B functionality. Acumatica ERP, as an example, is really pretty heavy on the manufacturing and WD side of things. And so it's a natural fit for them to work with that as people are trying to get more and more products available for B2B e-commerce. But like this participant has said, B2B has absolutely been lagging behind B2C. And I think a lot of it is really just technology hasn't kept up with it. Like there hasn't been enough investment in B2B e-commerce. B2B buyers and are just fundamentally different. Being able to ship on my own accounts versus having to ship on my trade partners' accounts. Being able to handle things like unique billing or post shipping billing invoices. Completely different expectations around shipping as a whole, right? Like in B2B e-commerce, it's pretty common to have more transparent shipping costs, right? As opposed to a free or a fast kind of an option. In fact, in a lot of B2B, shipping can be the difference between profit and loss. So I definitely am seeing a lot more movement there on the technology side. And definitely, like the participant said here, it's been a slower adoption. And I think that what I'm seeing is that a lot more of the B2C high volume, high package operations, processes, how they think about the shopping cart, how they think about checkout and fulfillment, they're really trying to harmonize those as much as possible to make B2B more user friendly, to call a spade a spade. Of course, there's still been a gigantic amount of EDI transactions that have always been around, but I definitely see a whole lot more of a move for people to create better tools for the businesses that they work with to be able to both place orders with those systems as well as to be able to fulfill and track them in a more consumer-like experience.
Yeah, I mean, bottom line, you said that really well. Bottom line is B2B is usually just more difficult. There's a lot more details. The orders are larger. The larger the orders, the less the B2C functionality really meshes well with those B2B order types, especially at scale. And the truth is that we don't talk about a lot. We talk about e-commerce and the growth of e-commerce, but we really don't talk about the fact that every business is now e-commerce, whether they are yet or not. They will be. And if you ask why, the answer is because they can be. If you're a manufacturer and you're making product, you don't have to only sell wholesale. You could sell through any channel you want, and you could sell wholesale. The options from a channel sales perspective are almost infinite, which further compounds the distribution challenge and the functionality needed to fulfill those orders. So yeah, I think you hit the nail on the head, Mike, and we are seeing a lot of traction there. Internally, we're seeing a lot of requests for more of that functionality. We're investing in it heavily. And we believe that a lot of the future growth in e-commerce is going to be in B2B.
We had another question here around same-day shipping, actually. So one person asked, do you see a strong demand from customers for same-day delivery? Do you see this as a big opportunity for FedEx Same-Day City or Roadie to help smaller merchants achieve that level of service?
Yeah, it's interesting because I've been reading all the tech news about how a lot of these same-day companies and the subsidies, the venture capital subsidies and private equity subsidies that have really gotten them to scale. And as they've dried up with the market, how a lot of these companies are really struggling or closing up shop entirely. We have not historically seen enormous demand for same-day deliveries. There has been some in some major metro areas where there is inherent density. Obviously, the most important of all these, where all these get tested, is San Francisco or Manhattan, right? But because those cities don't look like, Orange County or Dallas, Texas, or some of these other areas where the density doesn't exist, the practicality of same-day delivery diminishes quite substantially, as does the need. I mean, if you're living in a big city, you really want that thing to come from right down the street because you know it's only a block away. So we haven't seen a lot of demand for that. Mike, I don't know if you want to touch on this more, if you've seen something that I haven't.
Yeah, no, I would definitely just echo your sentiment. We're fully aware of these services and the fact that they are available to merchants. But it really hasn't been, we haven't seen a huge pressure from merchants that we work with or even prospects we're talking to need these. I'm not sure if it's because it's more specific to certain product classes or certain industries where it becomes maybe more of a prevalent or an expectation with the customers. But in general, like across the board, I definitely haven't seen like an overwhelming demand for it. But it's a very interesting option. I think part of the challenge of it is if my warehouse doesn't exist in that place where there's a same day city option or a local option, I've got to get it there, right? So now I'm doing things like a multi-leg transaction, which isn't necessarily the easiest thing for a small or mid-sized merchant to do without some technology behind it. So I think that being able to leverage some of those services may be more of an interesting coordination for last mile than necessarily someone taking advantage of a local service that's available to them. We'll pull up a couple other questions here. What are your views on leveraging a 3PL to extend geographically or leveraging a partner's expertise? And what's your advice on engaging with a 3PL? How do you know you've picked the right one?
Yeah, and I think we partially touched on this already. One thing I didn't mention, on our website, we do have a 3PL workbook, a workbook that'll help walk you through the process of selecting a 3PL. I don't know, Alex, if one of you guys can put that in the chat for everyone, put a link, or we can put it in the follow-up email. But there's questions you want to ask. You want to understand their capabilities. A lot of 3PLs specialize in certain product types. You want to make sure that you really get into SLAs and understanding what SLAs they'll commit to, those service level agreements, making sure you know when the orders will be processed so you can communicate that to your customer. I mean, I had a friend that ran customer service for a huge D2C brand, and they were using a 3PL, and the orders got so backed up, customers were just irate. And she decided to send out coupons to all these upset customers for, I think it was as much as like 50% off their future orders. And last time I had checked in with her on this, and this is an old story at this point, but last time I had checked in with her, out of these tens of thousands that she had sent out, it was like single digits had been redeemed. And the idea here is that customers were so upset by the delays that they completely abandoned the brand. They wouldn't even use a coupon for half off a next order. They were like, I'm not going to get my product. And so if you compare that to a strategy like Bite, that toothpaste company I mentioned earlier, where they're educating the customer, setting the right expectation up front, saying, we're going to deliver in this time frame, and this is why. And my guess is that company's doing very well. I don't have data to prove it, but I'm a happy customer, so I can tell you that. So I think on the 3PL side, the key is walk through a process, make sure you know the partner and that your needs meet theirs, and they can guarantee that those needs will be met. Use that workbook. And I would really encourage you to look at augmenting. If you have homogeneous product type, great. You don't want to, you want hands off, you're okay giving up some control, use a 3PL. But if you need those controls, if you have a lot of SKU diversity, then that 3PL could be a good partner for some inventory.
Yeah, I would definitely throw out there to inspect the breakdown of charges and really understand the shipping component. I've certainly seen a lot more 3PLs trying to leverage their shipping rates in order to win business early on, which is great. It can be a great way to get started. But the second that you're giving up control of your own relationships with carriers, you're starting to give up that capacity to third parties. You're not building credibility with that carrier or broker. And I think it's a really important thing to factor that into your balance for your overall kind of where you're heading in the future. Right? If you're planning on having some of your warehouses and augmenting them with 3PLs, really talk with those 3PLs about their ability to consistently use your accounts so that you can continue to get those benefits and discounts from the carriers. And maybe don't get too consumed with the maybe the cheap shipping price at face value, because you can drive yours down there over time too as you grow your business. Again, it's a balancing act.
You brought up a good point. I want to add one more thing on that, which is business stage. A lot of times there's confusion about what should be done overall. And if we really look at the stage of the business, it becomes clear. And yes, out of the gate, if you want hands off because you're starting a company and it's really small, sure, using a 3PL is a very low lift, easy way to get started, right? Or you could start fulfilling orders out of your garage and using, a micro business product like a ShipStation or something like that. Print labels, no big deal. But as you grow and you start getting into your own warehouse, you've got a lot of inventory. All of a sudden you need to keep track of that inventory. It becomes natural. Okay, now I need to buy a WMS. Right, I need to be able to track this inventory and track it well. And as you grow a little bigger and you start seeing the shipping costs balloon, and you start seeing that the negotiated rates that you were promised by your rep don't match the rates on the bill that you're getting, and that they're wildly different, and that your discounts are not really being realized, you obviously needed to step into more advanced shipping software where you can optimize those. And as you open additional facilities and stores, and you need to be able to ship from the right location and identify inventory in locations, you need more and more data to make more intelligent decisions. So I think a lot of these questions are more easily put in context if we look at the stage of the business and what that hottest burning fire is at that point in time.
Yeah, absolutely. I'll also throw out too, there's a reason why Amazon makes you book on their accounts for Prime. That obviously gets them more discounts and more control. So I think that's all we're going to have time for today. I'm going to do a couple of quick things just to wrap up. If you'd like a free copy of Adapt or Die, Jeremy's book, we're going to put a link to that in the chat right now, and we'll be sending a webinar follow-up email with information on how to order a copy straight to you. In addition, I want to also call out that we're running a really exciting contest right now. NetSuite's annual trade show, Suite World, is coming up at the end of September, the 27th through 30th. And we are giving away an all expenses paid trip up to $4,000 for one lucky winner. We've gone ahead and put that link here in the chat. You can scan that QR code now. We'll also drop the link here in the chat in case you want to sign up for that. And then the last quick note for today is that our next webinar is going to be on August 30th, and the topic is going to really focus on NetSuite. And it's the topic is you're live on NetSuite, now what? And we'll have an amazing panel of speakers, both NetSuite experts as well as some people from here at ShipHawk, talking about the next things that you do once you got your ERP live. There will be an invitation in your email in the coming weeks, so be on the lookout. Thank you everyone for joining us today. Thank you, Jeremy. It's great chatting.
Thanks, Mike.
Have a